So yes, welcome back to Ev on Everything, the show with the half-accurate title. The Ev part's true, I'm Ev. You can find me on Twitter at Ev Buckley. You can find the show on Twitter at Ev on Everything. The everything part, though, less assured so far. We are crawling closer and closer to being about everything, but we're a long way from it yet. For the moment, I'm just going to ask you to do the usual like and subscribe thing that I always ask for. Share the podcast to all your friends if you like it, because that helps us a great deal over here. And with that out of the way, we can dive straight into a strange situation here in the United Kingdom. They've decided to replicate the World Cup in domestic politics. It is a little out of the ordinary, but what's basically going on is just like in the World Cup, England is having an absolutely horrible, shocking, appalling meltdown disaster on the world stage with everyone watching, while Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland stay home. Because what's going on is Boris Johnson has decided that he is going to change all the rules about the COVID-19 lockdown, and all three devolved nations have responded with gales of laughter and warned English people not to try following those rules in their countries. So not the best start for Boris Johnson in his journey to the next stage of dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. Not the best start for his government. But really, honestly, more of a continuation of the way things have been for some time with these people. As a whole, the government here in the UK hasn't had much in the way of achievement in the past few years. You have to think all the way back into the mists of 2015 for perhaps the last noteworthy government achievement under David Cameron. That noteworthy achievement was tearing an unwilling United Kingdom out of the EU and introducing the venomous snake of right-wing slogan campaigning into the naive garden of the Conservative Party. You might say, if you were a cynic, that it was a novel pathogen enthusiastically colonizing a defenseless native population, in the manner of the United Kingdom enthusiastically colonizing the defenseless populations of large parts of the world, introducing novel pathogens and killing millions of them. You might say that if you were given to telling the truth, it's true. If you go back to that 2015 government, you can see a few contrasts with the current shower. It lasted a year, just over a year, 14 months or so, with only 3 resignations, which is good going by comparison with the last Conservative government to run its course, if it can be called a course, Boris Johnson's first effort. That lasted 3 months and then staggered on another 3 because everyone was enjoying watching it eat itself like someone soaked Cookie Monster's hands in butter and sugar and dosed him with powerful LSD. The stability of Cameron's government really does seem like a fever dream now. To imagine that someone in charge could hold together a coalition government for a 5-year term, could hold together their own Conservative government for a 5-year term. Imagine a government that didn't come into being already on death watch, only to later make watching people die a key aspect of its time in power. It was different only a few years ago, It was different because you would expect when a Conservative government came in with not an immense majority, 12 seats or something, that it would be stable enough to last. Now governments show up and you're just like, when's this one going to go? Months, weeks even. It was all the way through Theresa May's time. They were just waiting for somebody to stick the knife in. With Boris Johnson, it's just waiting for him to explode in a giant cloud of shambles and the whole thing to come crashing down because there's nothing behind it. Slogan campaigning of the kind that we've seen since Brexit, essentially, isn't new. Writing things on the side of a vehicle to trick people into acting against their own interests. I mean, that was in full swing with Theresa May's Home Office, right? But the phrase go home or face arrest just lacks a bit of pizzazz, right? You know, a half-decent test for whether the pithy collection of words you're thinking of painting on a bus even counts as a slogan at all is, does it, like 100 arrests last week in your area, need an explanatory footnote? If it does, you probably don't have a slogan, you just have a pile of rubbish. The car in front of you as you read this may or may not be a Toyota. Beans with a Z is not defined in most standard dictionaries. If you've got to asterisk it, it's not a slogan. So what changed was the transformation from go home or face arrest, which, while being suitably boring and uninspiring, at least carried a simple, misinterpretation-proof meaning. Okay? From there to Brexit means Brexit. Brexit, of course, is not defined in most standard dictionaries. It was just meaningless. The seed was planted during the second Cameron government. While Theresa May was playing with her toy vans, the Leave campaign for the EU referendum ran rings around the Remain campaign. And if you remember their slogans, Britain stronger in Europe means very little, sure, which is good from a sloganeering perspective, but it also imparts no actual information at all. Stronger is so poorly defined that it's meaningless, like Brexit means Brexit, right? Stronger doesn't tell anyone anything about what you think or what they should think. Doesn't say anything about the future. Britain in Europe is at least a statement. Vote leave is an imperative order to do something. You know? If you just get the slogan, you get the message. Leave.eu is an imperative as well. Leave the EU. And it carries a codified message of cool young people approving of it that old people that it's aimed at have no idea about. That little dot is making young people cringe for a moment, dismiss the entire of both sides of the referendum campaign as hopelessly out of touch, and then go back to like reassuring each other that Jon Snow isn't really dead or whatever was going on in 2015. If Vote Leave, the slogan, is the only thing that you read, and you don't go any further into the detail, your mind still has that message in it. It's still been ordered to vote leave, and you need to make an effort, an intellectual effort, to say, you know what, no, I don't agree with that. That is psychologically extremely powerful. You know, someone just repeats over and over, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, and you need to go, I am not going to do that, and here are my reasons. Leave.eu is similar, okay? But I strongly believe that that little dot and the .eu was really making a subtle point to the kind of people they were expecting to come out and vote. The kind of people who were going to vote against the European Union. It was linking it to technocracy. It was linking it to modern kind of failed society where everything has just gone digital. Okay? People would have thought that it was Nigel Farage trying to be cool, but it was Nigel Farage talking to other uncool old people about being cool. And they could believe at the same time that all the kids are down with this, while also thinking, I hate this whole EU techno thing. It's a sophisticated message, and it's encoded completely in this tiny slogan. You know? Britain stronger in Europe is rubbish. We already know you think Britain's stronger in Europe. You're campaigning to remain in the EU. One of the reasons that you get the entire message behind those Leave slogans is that there isn't anything behind the slogan to get. There's no more message there. Leaving the EU did not have a point. It existed only to create a fight, the winner of which would control the United Kingdom. Okay? It was always about that before the referendum. Eurosceptics in the Tory party were all about fighting within the Tory party. UKIP was all about driving the Tory party to the right. And if there's nothing behind it, there's no actual opinion on the EU really, then you have got all of the message by getting the slogan. And everything else will be confusing obfuscation designed to make you retreat to the comfort of the simplicity of the slogan. The typical vote leave strategy was to plaster 350 million and NHS on a bus, and then let everyone give it free publicity by arguing about the truth of it. There was nothing there behind it. 350 million was never going to go to the NHS anyway. 350 million was a made-up figure with nothing to back it. The NHS is a convenient cipher for national pride in the United Kingdom. In the political discourse, it can mean anything you like, from we've gone too socialist and we're spending too much money in the public sector and this is all waste and we will tighten the belts and we will, right the ship, through to we are so proud of our great achievements as the United Kingdom, we should be pumping money into this and building the greatest NHS in the world. The same people who claimed that they would give the NHS 350 million cheered as they voted down a bill to allow proper pay raises for the very same NHS. Pay had been frozen for years at 1% at the time below inflation. They were paying nurses and doctors and cleaners and everyone who worked on the NHS less and less and less every year. And a bill came before Parliament to say, we want to remove that 1% ceiling on pay increases for the NHS. Not some sort of pay bonanza, not some sort of ridiculous, unfinanceable, over-the-top promise. This was not electioneering. This was a simple, practical thing. And I felt this because I was working in the public sector at the time, although not in the NHS. And my pay was getting smaller and smaller as the years went on. I was in there for 4 or 5 years or something like that. And it was appreciably tighter and more difficult. And I was making less of the cost of living in the United Kingdom by the end of those years. 1% on 1% on 1%, getting less and less and less real money. And somebody in Parliament said, that is enough of that. We want these people to at least be paid the same year on year, not less and less and less. The people who said they were going to give the NHS 350 million, the Tory party, they cheered when that bill failed. Forget scratching the surface of this slogan. You could employ a Brexit-approved JCB digger for the duration of a full parliamentary term limit and not find anything of substance underneath it. And that Brexit slogan won. Remain supporting Theresa May quickly came to power, and she learned her lesson fast. Never say anything, never mean anything, and if possible, never do anything. And she refined the process to a high art, perhaps even too refined. She may have gone too far. A little like a European royal family, progressively losing its chins to a succession of overzealous purifications of the line until eventually the madness sets in. She took the proven methods too far. She dreamed too big, a level of meaninglessness that was unsustainable in any circumstances, let alone the maelstrom of pre-Brexit, post-truth politics. Brexit means Brexit. Means what it says. More detail required? Brexit in red, white and blue. She flew too close to the sun, and accordingly, that newspaper went from depicting her trampling frontbenchers under her high heels to her as a dodo and her Brexit deal dead. She didn't last. Boris Johnson, a far more skilled practitioner of slogan politics, took over. Well aware that Brexit doesn't mean anything, he settled on the highly effective "Get Brexit Done." And again, people searched for meaning. They argued about it. and in doing so they constantly spread and repeated the message. The more confusion there was over what does get Brexit done mean, the more appealing it became to see people just think, get Brexit done, yeah. Why is this taking time? I don't understand this thing. There's no way for me to understand it because no one is letting me understand it. The whole thing is a mess. It doesn't make any sense. Because it can't make any sense because obviously it doesn't make any sense, right? It's a circular thing. Brexit never had a point. Brexit was never good or defensible or, a useful thing in any way. So going after why would we want to achieve this gets you absolutely nowhere. When you're lost in that kind of mist of unmeaning, it's comfortable to go back to just get Brexit done. And then it suddenly makes logical sense. It didn't before. It didn't mean anything until you tried to discuss it. And then when you tried to discuss it, the meaning came out. The appeal came out. Why do we want to be lost in this mist, trying to work out what Brexit is, how to do it, what the benefits are? Let's just get it out of the way. Arguing about it made it good. Arguing about it made it work. So in spite of that first government and its appalling record on absolutely everything, he created with Get Brexit Done a massive majority in Parliament. It was the final proof that the completely empty slogan, crafted to mean without meaning, instruct and infect, and yes, inspire, even though it's super cynical, could outweigh even the most spectacularly, multifariously, inordinately incompetent record of government in history. The worst government in UK history. A government, I still have to remind myself, still had its entire existence less than a year ago. It was in June or July of last year. It stumbled on until September or so. And then the election happened in December, but the decision right at the end of October was when it all fell apart. But, that's very recent. Why focus on the past few years so much? Empty sloganeering has been around for a long, long time. They have been flinging words at people to get them to do things without thinking it through for a really, really long time. Well, that Cameron Tory government, the stable one with a majority that lasted a full 5-year term, a big campaigning plank in the 2015 election, which Cameron won to get those 5 years, was stability. Okay? There was a 12-seat majority for the Tories, a swing of 24 seats for a 0.8% increase in the vote. If that seems strange, it's because the first-past-the-post system is strange, or broken, or a tool of the oppression of the people of the United Kingdom, depending on whether it benefits you or not. For example, the Tory party won about 10 times the vote of the Green Party, in pure percentage terms. 38% to 3.8, give or take. And they were rewarded with 326 times as many seats. The Green Party got 1, and the Tory party got 326, just for instance. That government that was supposed to be stable and dependable, and that looked like it would last a whole 5-year term, was gone in 14 months. The previous 5-year-long term, they campaigned on, we lasted 5 years, we are stable, we are strong, we are dependable. It was gone 14 months later, thanks to those simple slogans. Why are we looking back to there? Because had that government survived, had that slogan-based electioneering not worked, that government would have run until last Friday. It would have covered all of the descent into political lunacy that we have endured in the last 5 years. Cameron's promise of stability his promise of a government that you could depend on and trust exploded. What happened was he called the bluff of the Eurosceptic wing of his own party. With a small majority of only about 12 seats, he was vulnerable to rebels. There were enough hard right Eurosceptics who could be whipped up by, threats from UKIP kind of election candidates, okay, or who could just be a cabal against him, even if they didn't really care that much about the politics behind it. They didn't like, being in coalition with the Lib Dems in the previous parliament. They didn't like the fact that Cameron was, pretended to be a nice guy. They wanted a harder nosed, much more hardline right wing government, and they weren't getting it. And they don't like that because they've got this born to rule idea where they, with their sensible, hard headed, economic whatever, are supposed to be in charge. Okay? And this genie exploded out of the bottle after the 2015 election. But instead of Robin Williams, in a beloved yet faintly insensitive casting decision, the genie was a toxic cloud of political death, and it rolled into the lowest gutters and sewers of the Tory party and leached into its masonry before it chewed inexorably up through the structure of the building and exploded out at the head of the dining table like a sandworm with Boris Johnson's pallid, sun-starved face. By the time the surveyors saw the political death termites at work, it was too late to remove them. And a last gasp 21 Tory salute of rebels firing ceremonial smoke in the House of Commons was useless in the face of them. We rolled straight from Get Brexit Done to the sunlit fuck uplands of Stay Alert. So I stayed alert this morning. I was so alert that I didn't miss the fact that the death toll for the United Kingdom passed 40,000 people today. 40,000 people have died, and we're being told to stay alert, as if that would just float by unnoticed. It's kind of like, keep an eye on that, people of the United Kingdom. You want to watch out for a situation that's killing 40,000 people and isn't even done yet. Used to be that slogans were about managing political opinion and seeding ideas and controlling and molding the flow of the opinion of the nation. Now they're about actual life and death, specifically, proximately. Used to be that, if you let the Tories get away with it, they would introduce a bedroom tax, and the bedroom tax would hit the finances of people who needed the space in their council homes to, care for a disabled relative, say, or something like that. And you could measure the impact on the health outcomes of these people at a remove, It's not like a letter arrived on their doormat saying you now have to, accept a cut in your benefits if you're not going to let out part of your home to somebody else, and then they suddenly relapsed into cancer. It's not how it used to work. It used to be you needed to do, ironically, epidemiological studies of the outcomes for health on the people that these kind of slogans and policies affected. Now they're about actual life and death. Now you follow the policy and people live or die depending on what the policy is. And that is a good reason to stay alert, right? Is it even possible to stay alert to a microbe? It's been asked a number of times recently, as you can imagine. No, it's not. Stay alert is not intended to mean anything, just like all the previous slogans, but it does have a function. What it's doing is loading personal responsibility onto individuals. They now want to make it your decision, and by extension, your fault, how you deal with coronavirus. The government does not want to be in charge of what people can and can't do anymore. They want you to be making that decision. Did you contract COVID-19 recently? Ooh, you should have been alert, shouldn't you? Were you being alert? How alert were you being? How can anyone be alert to a virus? They haven't defined what that means at all. Imagine a guy in the 1980s saying he's off to the men's sauna. Should he bring these condoms? I don't know. Are you alert to the virus? Does alert mean condoms? The government didn't say. We know that they are a very solid and useful barrier to infection, and in controlling the spread of a virus that is killing millions, in the case of HIV, people all over the world, they are one of our most important behaviors, one of our most important tools to stop this. But the government just said stay alert. That, I think, would not have dealt with the still ongoing, HIV pandemic, would it? I don't think people would have accepted that, Box of condoms in one hand, leaflet from the government in the other saying stay alert. I think I'll just stay alert. No, the leaflet should say use the condoms because that's how you deal with the spread of the virus. And that is actually the level that we're at here because people are dying directly because of the nature of government's advice. There is a simple set of guidelines already about how to manage and control the spread of coronavirus, and Stay Alert is designed to undermine that. These are the same people who brought you herd immunity at the start of the crisis, which is probably better described as just let people die until it's over somehow. And if you're not on board with that level of cynicism about the motivations of these people, you need to hear Health Secretary Matt Hancock this morning. Okay? Asked if workers have a legal obligation to return to work if they feel unsafe, he answered, employment law has not changed. And that means, yes, they have a legal obligation to return to work. They can be fired for opting to stay away because that's how it works outside of coronavirus. That's what the law says. If you have a legitimate grievance with something to do with safety or, workplace safety in your employer, you are not supposed to just refuse to go to work full stop. You're supposed to report it. There's supposed to be mechanisms. And if you say, hey, I'm not coming in today, somebody else has the flu, you can be fired for that. Maybe you can then try to win a case at an employment tribunal later, but it's not like you can demand your pay out of your employer in the interim. You're done. Employers can fire you for refusing to show up to work. That's pretty fundamental, right? The deal is, you come do this job, we give you this money. If you don't come to do the job, you harm the employer, harm them much worse than just, not doing the job. You harm them because they were relying on you to do the job and it has knock-on effects elsewhere. You can be fired for that, and rightly so. So then he was asked why grandparents can't see their grandchildren while following his new guidelines. He decided this was a good time to trial his post-cabinet ministry stand-up routine by saying the principles are really clear. Stay alert. Older people, he said, are more vulnerable. And then he summed up his answer by saying, we need to get people back to work. There's a lot, as they say, to unpack there. First of all, Matt Hancock and presumably the rest of the Tory front bench are unfamiliar with the sectors of UK society where grandparents are 40 years old. Because if you have a kid when you're 20, a grown adult, And then they have a kid when they're 20, also a grown adult. No kind of crisis teenage pregnancies required here. You're a grandparent when you're 40 if your kid has a kid. You know? You're not allowed to see them on the advice that older people are more vulnerable. 40 is younger than most of the cabinet. You know? 40 is way, way, way below the risk area. You need to be over 70. 30 full years, if anyone's counting. Older than 40 before it starts to really ramp up and get seriously risky. Second, though, aside from the complete inability of Matt Hancock to understand the demographic makeup of the United Kingdom, even though he's the health secretary. Secondly, the reason we have to take this risk at all is for work. Work is literally more important than life here. If it was about life, the answer would have been about transmissions and death rates. It would have been like, you can see your grandparents, soon. When we're sure that transmissions and death rates are down, when we know that R value is low, when we've got more space in intensive care in the NHS, and when we're better at treating this, when we've worked out what drugs help alleviate symptoms, when we've worked out better how to mitigate this and give that support that people need to get through it. At that point, then it'll be sensible to potentially risk hanging out in the park 2 meters away from Granny. Okay? That wasn't the answer. The answer was work. And do people need to work right now? Do people need to work? Don't ask Matt. He didn't offer an opinion on what people need. He told us we need people to get back to work. Those headline figures in the economy are not going to trend upwards all by themselves, are they? We, whoever we is, need people to work. Work from home if you can, apparently. Which will be welcome news to the guy who locked down and left scaffolding wrapped around my neighbour's house for 2 months with no work going on. Those guys will be delighted to find they can now lie on their couch with an iPad all day and scaffold projects with a swipe of the screen. Or in reality, there are a lot of people out there who will now be forced to go back to work in England because they cannot work from home. Okay, it's simply not possible. They need to be there in person. And they won't have the ability to say no because their employers are still allowed to fire them for not coming in. So you can be as worried as you want about a cavalier employer who has a terrible attitude to safety, who has always been lax on all of that stuff. And they say to you, oh yeah, don't worry, we're going to implement the government's thing. Yeah, we will. And you're like, no way, no you won't. I'm not coming in yet. Not until it's much, much safer. And they say, okay, you're fired. And your recourse to that is to make a complaint about them, giving them the right of reply to make up a load of shite about how they did everything right. And if you can't absolutely prove that they were so wrong about how they implemented everything, that you were right to be concerned, they're going to get away with firing you. So it'll be at the expense of your time and effort to desperately try to drag these guys over the coals until you get some kind of settlement out of them sometime in the future, but you're still fired in the meantime. You're still fired. And that's Matt Hancock's solution to the idea that it's now okay to go out and, hang out and socialize with a person if you're 2 meters apart, but that, work will just sort itself out. Giving this giant indicator to the employers of the United Kingdom that it's okay to get things back in gear and get moving is going to be counterbalanced by the government saying, we impress on employers the importance of taking care of their employees. The new guidelines say stay 2 meters apart where possible, but not where not possible. So we're asking people to define the limits of the possible themselves, Going down the shop, having these philosophical discussions in your own head, because you're the only person allowed into Tesco one at a time, about what really is and isn't possible in the grand scheme of things. It's a pretty grandiose rationalization for squeezing past you to grab a pint of milk like Egypts have been doing since day one, but Boris has the back of those Egypts. He feels their pain. After all, we're being told to stay alert to the virus by a man who infected himself with it by shaking hands with people at a COVID-19 ward. He is not the man to be listening to about staying alert about anything, is he? There are many new things that you can do in England from tomorrow that you couldn't do before. Take basketball, for instance. It's mentioned as an example in the government's kind of published literature on this. Basketball courts are reopening for a strange new variant of the sport where one household can play together with one other person, all keeping 2 meters apart at all times. And no doubt, alert for the virus, they will then pass a ball from person to person over and over again, from hand to hand to hand, for the duration of the game, panting out their joyful exercise outdoors as often as they wish, all over the ball. This is permitted. It's not just permitted, it's used as an example of what's a good idea. You can't, though, play a round of golf with both your parents. So me and my girlfriend could not go to a local golf course, hit a few balls, walk off the tee box, and have the parents come up and do the same thing. One parent could, and could then go home to the other parent. But not both at the same time. This advice is not meant to make sense. And it's been reported that the government's own medical advisors were not given a right of approval over this. They weren't allowed to even run their eye over it and say, hey, listen, here's some advice specifically about this. They gave advice first. The government supposedly listened to the advice and came up with this slogan themselves. And apparently they also didn't consult the Department of Health. This was done in number 10. That is why. Because it was never meant to make sense. This is a number 10 agenda. This is a prime ministerial move. This is not about the health of the nation. It's not about individuals, and it's not about keeping anybody safe. It's about whipping up public opinion in favor of ending the lockdown without saying that. They're deploying the tools that they used with things like Get Brexit Done. They want people discussing and arguing and disagreeing over what stay alert means. And the more that they do that, the more that stay alert becomes the default. And your particular interpretation of it becomes the truth. And that interpretation is going to be the simplest one possible, just like it has been in the past, because it's really hard to do the complex stuff. Okay? Just like going all the way back to vote, leave, every time you hear it, it's an order, and it takes an intellectual effort of will to decide that you are not going to go along with it. Stay alert is slightly more subtle, because stay alert isn't an action that you do in the world, it's a way that you think in your head. So nobody has asked you to go into a polling place and cast a vote, which is an active action that you need to make a decision to do. Okay? It's just a state of mind. Stay alert. But it still takes you an effort of will to decide, I'm not going to do that. I am going to stay at home. I am not going to do that. I am going to not play that ridiculous basketball match. You know? And the more people argue about that, the less that effort of will is going to seem worthwhile. It's going to get confused, it's going to get muddied, and people are going to desire, they're going to yearn for the simplicity of just knowing what to do. Stay alert will then calcify into what you do. You stay alert. And it won't be stay home anymore. It'll be go out and do whatever the hell you want and, interpret the idea of the possible yourself. Make up your own new rules for basketball. Have a bit of hand sanitizer, there. Promise yourself you're going to wash your hands before you get home. And play that basketball match. You've been staying alert, after all. You're alert to the consequences. You're alert to the requirements. You're alert to the guidelines. And allegedly, you're alert to the virus that you can't even see. When that happens, if it hasn't already happened, the Tories will have the complete compliance of the people of the UK in order to open up again and start up businesses and, reverse the economic decline that is going to kill them at the polls ultimately. Remember, when they got together a group of scientific advisors to decide what good advice they could give the people of the UK for how to deal with this, they sent their electoral strategist to oversee that. Their electoral strategist was in the room. This is all about Tory political strategy. It's all electoral, even though there was an election very recently. It is all about maintaining their power. They don't care about the health aspect of this. If they did, they would get out of the way and let the health people get on with it. And if you don't believe that, the example of how to do it right is sitting in Holyrood making sensible, level-headed statements about carefully maintaining the controls that have allowed us to get through this, even with the death rates that we have. 40,000 people are dead. This is not the time to be cavalier with your process of dealing with this. But of course, stay alert is not about dealing with this. Right, so that was a portentous end to the show, wasn't it? It was Ev on everything, and it was all about staying alert and political slogans. Thank you so much for listening. I had a really good time making this episode, even though it was about terrible, terrible things, because I got to bash the Tories a lot, and rightly so, because they were terrible on this issue all the way through, and they were central to the whole political sloganeering thing. Don't worry, I do bash other political parties too, when they mess things up at the level that the Tories do. Tories have been in power for a while now, so that's why you'll find that they are on the wrong end of a lot of the ire. If you're a Tory supporter out there listening, I do sympathise with how it must feel to be under attack constantly, but 40,000 people are dead. Anyway, thank you again for listening. You can find me at Ev Buckley on Twitter, and you can find the show at Ev on Everything, also on Twitter. And I'd like you, as usual, to like and subscribe and share and rate and review the podcast. All of those things that help us to build up those algorithm spots, get on those lists of people's, listening, be on people's radars. We need all that from you, and you can do it at the touch of your phone or whatever it is. Tap the 5 stars for us, please. Give us a little review. Tell people that we're doing well here. It's really, really important. There's no more that I can say than just please do it, and it is important, so I'm going to leave it there. We are going to be back as usual on Friday. last week with the Florian Schneider episode. We came in a little bit early, but it was a bank holiday in our defense. This week we are going to be back on Friday, and we hope to see you again. Thank you so much for listening. Bye bye.